Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we have entered day 108 of the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. The fighting right now can only be described as incredibly brutal and intense, taking place within the confines of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. And right now, we continue to see Russian mop-up operations and the heavy use of massive amounts of heavy artillery and multiple launch rocket systems continuing in this area of operation. Furthermore, we are continuing to see a rather significant buildup of Russian forces to the north, northwest, and north of Sloviansk. We anticipate that in the area to the west of Severodonetsk, around the area of Izum, northwest and southeast of that locale, this area here where my cursor is circling, there could be up to 30 Russian battalion tactical groups preparing for a rather significant push towards that crucial city of Sloviansk and then obviously Kramatorsk as well. We continue to receive anecdotal reports from the front line. The situation is becoming more and more precarious for Ukrainian forces. The big issue right now is the lack of ammunition. There has been a multitude of reports which stipulate that Ukrainian frontline units are starting and continuing to run out of crucial ammunition, especially ammunition to conduct counter battery fire against Russian artillery units that continue to pummel their positions, the Ukrainian positions. Right now, unfortunately for the Ukrainian military, many of its units, its frontline units, and even rear area units really have no choice but to hunker down and be subjected to massive amounts of Russian artillery fire. There are some reports that indicate that Russian tube for tube in terms of meeting Ukrainian artillery is 10 to 1. At this point, that's really irrelevant if the Ukrainian military does not have the ability to supply those artillery units, its own artillery units, in the field with munitions that are needed to fire those artillery pieces. Again, we had talked about it before: the 152 millimeter, the 130, the 122 millimeter, former Soviet designed, much of it designed equipment that both the Russian Federation and the Ukrainians use. There are also many nations, obviously, around the world that use the former Soviet bloc and current Russian systems, and that's what's making it, again, very difficult for the Western Alliance, the NATO organization, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Said organization twice, but very difficult to supply Ukraine with the material that is needed to attempt to hold the Russians back. And now the West can supply, obviously, and is supplying its own systems, such as the 155 millimeter, but unfortunately for the Ukrainians, the inflow of both weapon systems and the ammunition is subject to interdiction by the Russians, and is probably not being delivered in the quantitative needs that would really cause a balance in the ongoing fight that is occurring. But that's the biggest issue right now in terms of reporting that we are hearing from the front line, is that especially east of the Dnieper River, as you get towards areas such as Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Severodonetsk, very difficult for these Ukrainian units to be supplied in the field. And that is the Russian strategy right now. The Russian strategy is not specifically to win small individual tactical battles, and the Ukrainians have been very good at messaging some of these small incremental defeats that they have inflicted upon Russian forces. And that obviously does help with the national morale, and it helps with the perception that is occurring with kind of the low information viewer who happens to be watching CNN or Fox or some other news channel. But the reality is the Russians are fighting a much bigger picture war that is designed to eventually kill the entire Ukrainian military apparatus and its ability to field a cohesive fighting force that can continue to resist the Russian forces. Now we will continue to see these reports come in of some minor Ukrainian victories against Russian forces, and yes, the Ukrainians are putting up a magnificent defensive and an overall resistance to this Russian invasion of Ukraine. And many folks have been categorically proven wrong, to include some of the most high-ranking officials in the United States military that anticipated a very, very quick destruction and takeover of the country by Russian forces. And months before this conflict even started, we had talked here at Military and Foreign Affairs Network that indeed this would be a long and quite possibly bloody conflict, and we would not see the Ukrainians capitulate very quickly and would resist the Russians quite possibly for some period of time, as long as the Russians weren't able to change the status within the Ukrainian military in terms of getting some high-ranking Ukrainian commanders to defect over to the Russian side. Now, that may have happened in some cases down in Kherson. We believe the Russians were successful in some intelligence operations that allowed for a rapid advance and seizure of Kherson, quite possibly unverified, but we may find out later that that actually occurred in terms of some Russian intel operations that were able to compromise Ukrainian senior military commanders. But at the same time, those efforts still are continuing, and those pressures for some of these higher echelons, higher-ranking members of the Ukrainian military are going to only increase as this Russian pressure continues its continued pressure operation against the Ukrainian state. And again, you have to kind of remove the concept of some of these small set-piece battles and, again, look at the big picture in terms of what the strategy of the Russian Federation is right now in terms of its attempt to what I would define as kill the Ukrainian military like a great python that is strangling a deer. That is more or less what is happening in some areas of the conflict right now, in terms of Russian interdiction efforts and the continued high pressure use of massive amounts of artillery in this ongoing conflict. But right now we're watching very, very closely northwest of Sloviansk. We are watching this Russian buildup that is taking place. We are also continuing to watch the ongoing Russian offensive near Popasna, in this area here where my cursor is circling. And again, the whole concept is just to tighten the grip around areas near Severodonetsk, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and continue this pressure campaign. We had talked about in an earlier video about the buildup of Ukrainian forces in other areas, such as in the south near Mykolaiv and Zaporizhia. Again, we're not sure if this is an anticipated possible offensive operation by Ukrainian forces or just positioning forces in response to Russian positioning of its forces. I would say, given the situation on the ground, it would probably not be very prudent for the Ukrainians to launch offensive operations here in the south when it is having great difficulty supplying its forces more over here in the east. So that would obviously cause a great expense of ammunition and other much-needed supplies if, in fact, the Ukrainians are still wishing to hold on to other areas such as Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Or we could be seeing this as more of a holding operation by Ukrainian forces to further strengthen its lines in the west. And the Ukrainians may have to look at some sort of organized withdrawal from some of these areas. That would serve twofold. First, it would better position Ukrainian forces. You can clearly see they are slowly being surrounded and are at risk in certain areas of being fully enveloped. Now, if the Ukrainians do that, then the question is, do we see a general collapse of the Ukrainian lines and just see a complete flight of the Ukrainian military west of the Dnieper River? And I think that is a concern right now for the Ukrainian military general staff, is if we do order tactical withdrawals in certain areas, does that turn into just a headlong, ultimately collapse and retreat west of the Dnieper River? And I think that is also going into the continued strategy of Ukrainian forces, and why we're not seeing some more prudent and reasonable tactical retreats in situations that just are not going to work out in their best interest. And we saw that in Mariupol. And the Ukrainians lost or had captured well over 2,000 battle-hardened, very well-trained soldiers who can no longer fight because they're now in Russian captivity because of that kind of that not one step back mentality. But again, that goes twofold. If you do start to order tactical withdrawals, then do the Russians exploit that and start some very renewed and aggressive maneuver operations against Ukrainian forces. And that can also be in the Ukrainian advantage, as well, as you would then be extending Russian lines further west. So we've seen some issues, especially in the north and at the start of the campaign, where as the Russians got very, very deep into Ukrainian territory, they had some significant challenges in regards to supply and keeping its fighting units in good condition as they continued their drive on Kiev. And that same issue could also occur, obviously, as the Russians continue to drive deeper, or if the Russians see a general retreat or some sort of tactical withdrawal that they feel that they can exploit. And again, the Russians kind of bite and go and then eventually find themselves in the same predicament as before. But right now, it does seem static, but at the same time, it is not static. There is a method behind both the Russian way they are executing this war, and then obviously the Ukrainians as well have some great concerns about possible tactical withdrawals and then dropping back to other fortified areas that could alleviate some of the continued casualties that the Ukrainians are taking, especially in this eastern area of the conflict zone around Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and several Donetsk. But watching this very, very closely in terms of what's happening near Izum, and then obviously Popasna as well. But as the days continue to move forward, and as this pressure campaign continues by Russian forces, things are only going to perpetually worsen for the Ukrainian military in general. And eventually we could see, as I talked about before, that possible tactical withdrawal turns into a general retreat, followed by a general collapse of its armed forces east of the Dnieper River. And I think right now that is the general strategy of the Russian armed forces at this point. And it's going to be a very, very difficult challenge for the Ukrainians to kind of overcome this strategy by Russian forces at this point. But that's what we have for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk again very, very soon. Have a great day.